My parents sold my apartment for my sister Fairytale wedding, and when I confronted them they laughed and said, "Think of it as your gift." But later, when they read the message I sent them, their faces turned ghostly white. The truth was, I had been the one pulling the strings all along. I never had anything handed to me. While my sister was showered with attention, gifts, and praise, I had to fight for every little thing. She was the golden child, the one my parents paraded at family gatherings, while I was treated like an afterthought. Maybe that's why I worked so hard. Every late-night job, every coin saved, every sacrifice, it was all for one goal: to buy a place of my own. A small apartment, nothing extravagant, but it was mine. My escape. My proof that I could build something without their help. For years, that apartment was my sanctuary. My safe space. Every corner held a piece of me, of my struggles, of my victories. It was more than just walls and a roof. It was freedom. But then came my sister's wedding. A fairy tale, my parents called it. Nothing could be too much for their precious daughter. And when the bills started to mount, when they realized the dream wedding they promised was slipping out of reach, they looked for a solution. Not in their own pockets but in mine. I came home one evening to find papers missing, documents shuffled, whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. And then the truth hit me like a blade to the chest. My parents had sold my apartment. The home I worked for. The life I built. All gone, for flowers, dresses, and chandeliers. When I confronted them, my voice shaking, my father laughed in my face. My mother smirked and said the words that will forever echo in my memory: "Think of it as your gift to your sister." A gift? My blood, sweat, and years of sacrifice, reduced to a gift for someone who never lifted a finger. I wanted to scream, to tear the room apart, but I didn't. I stayed silent. Because in that moment I knew something they didn't. They thought they had taken everything from me. But I had already set something in motion. That night I sat in the dark, phone in hand, and typed a message. Calm. Precise. Sharp enough to slice through their arrogance. And the next morning their phones buzzed. I watched as they read it. First confusion, then disbelief. And then their faces drained of color. They sat frozen, pale, trembling. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they had won. But the truth was, I had been the one pulling the strings all along. My father's hand tightened around the phone. He glanced at my mother, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. My sister, who had been chattering excitedly about her honeymoon, suddenly went quiet. The room was heavy with silence, and all of them were staring at me, like I had just set fire to the ground beneath their feet. But I didn't say a word. I just sat there, calm, almost too calm, while their faces twisted from arrogance to panic. That message, it wasn't a threat. It wasn't begging for what was mine. No, what I wrote was far worse. Because while they were busy planning the perfect wedding, I had been preparing too. Preparing in silence. Collecting evidence. Every shady deal. Every forged signature. Every lie they thought I was too blind to notice. My parents didn't know I kept copies of the documents they tried to hide. They didn't know that when I signed the purchase papers for my apartment, I also made sure my name was tied to accounts and assets they assumed I had no access to. They thought selling my apartment would humiliate me. But the message I sent showed them exactly what they had really lost. My mother's lips trembled. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered. But she already knew I would. My sister looked at me, her perfect little world crumbling. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice rising. But I didn't answer. I wanted her to sit in the same uncertainty I had lived in my whole life. Ignored, dismissed, treated like I didn't matter. And as the silence dragged on, they all began to realize. This wasn't the end of me. It was only the beginning. My sister's voice echoed in the silence. "What did you do?" she pressed again, her tone sharp, almost desperate. But I didn't answer. I let the silence drag, because sometimes silence is more terrifying than words. My father broke first. "This is nonsense," he muttered, his voice tight, but I saw the way his hand shook as he set the phone down. He was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. My mother, though, she knew. Her eyes darted toward me, and I could see the memory flicker across her face. The times I had walked into the room quietly, the way I had paid attention when they thought I wasn't listening, the notebooks I always carried. She knew I had been collecting things. Watching. Waiting. The message I sent was simple. Just one line and an attachment. Funny how papers never disappear when you make copies. "You might have sold my apartment, but I own more than you think." Attached were scanned copies of documents they thought were buried. records of shady transfers, property deeds they claimed were in their name but were tied to me. Proof of their betrayal. Proof of their fraud. The moment they saw it, their faces drained of color. My parents had gambled everything on me staying quiet, on me being the child who would endure and never fight back. But this time, they realized they had underestimated me. My sister leaned forward, her voice cracking. What does this mean, Dad? What's happening? Neither of them answered. They couldn't, because for the first time the power had shifted and they knew it. I sat back calm, letting them squirm. They had taken my home, my sanctuary, the symbol of all my hard work. But I had something much bigger in my hands now. And as I watched the fear spread across their faces, I knew this was only the beginning. My father finally spoke, his voice breaking the silence. Where did you get those papers? I tilted my head slightly. Where do you think? His jaw clenched. He knew the answer. He just didn't want to admit that the daughter they ignored, the child they underestimated, had been watching their every move. My mother leaned forward, her voice trembling. You don't understand what you've done. If anyone else sees this. I cut her off with a small smile. If anyone else sees this, then the world will finally know the truth. About you. About everything. She went pale. My sister looked between us, confused, panicked. What truth? What are you hiding? She demanded, but my parents stayed silent. And that was the moment I realized something even bigger. My sister had no idea. She had been pampered and spoiled, yes, but she didn't know the lengths my parents had gone to fund her perfect life. The fear in their eyes told me I had hit a nerve deeper than just selling my apartment. The documents I had, those transfers, those deeds, meant more than I realized. I had stumbled into something they had been hiding for years. My father stood up abruptly, pacing. His hands were shaking. Delete it, he ordered. His voice tried to sound commanding, but it cracked. Delete those files now. I didn't move. Or what? I asked quietly. That single question made him freeze. Because for once he had no answer. No threat, no punishment, no way to control me. My mother whispered under her breath. You don't know what you've started. But she was wrong. I knew exactly what I had started. And I wasn't planning on stopping. And the more they tried to silence me, the more I wanted answers. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the glow of the screen lighting up their anxious faces. Maybe my sister deserves to know, I said softly. My thumb hovered over the attachment. No, my father barked louder than I'd ever heard him. My sister flinched, staring at him in shock. Why? What's in there? She demanded, her voice trembling now. So they stayed quiet. So I decided for them. You wanted to play games with me, so let's play, I said. My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. I opened one of the files and turned the phone so they could see. Recognize these transfers? It was a series of payments, large sums of money, funneled through accounts my parents swore they didn't control. Except the names on those accounts were familiar. Family, friends, distant relatives. All people who never should have had access to that kind of money. But the most shocking part wasn't the money itself. It was the deed attached at the end. A property, worth far more than my small apartment, registered in my sister's name years ago. She gasped when she saw it. This is mine, she whispered. My father's face darkened. My mother closed her eyes as if the truth itself was too heavy to bear. I looked directly at my sister. Yes. While I was working 2 jobs just to afford a single room, they were funneling money into properties and assets under your name. And do you want to know the worst part? It wasn't even their money to begin with. The room fell silent. My sister's hands shook as she clutched the phone. What do you mean, not their money? I leaned back, my words slicing through the quiet. I mean, they stole it. From people who trusted them. From accounts they were never supposed to touch. My apartment was just the tip of the iceberg. What I found goes back years. My father's face turned ashen. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. And for the first time in my life they looked small, cornered, powerless. And in that moment I realized the truth. The apartment they stole from me wasn't the biggest betrayal. It was just the one that finally pushed me to uncover the darkness they'd been hiding all along. My sister's face drained of color as her eyes stayed locked on the property deed in her name. Her lips trembled, and for once the girl who had everything looked fragile, breakable. You put this in my name? She whispered to our parents. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. My mother reached out to her, her voice soft, pleading. It was for you. For your future. Everything we did for you. But my sister recoiled like her touch burned. For me. You stole money, you used me, and you let me believe I deserved all of it. Tears welled in her eyes as the reality sank in. The fairy tale wedding she'd been bragging about, the dresses, the flowers, the house waiting for her after. It was all built on stolen foundations. I watched her crumble, but I didn't feel pity. Not yet. For years I was made to believe I was less, that I had to struggle because I wasn't worthy of more. And now she was tasting the same bitterness. My father finally slammed his fist against the table, his mask cracking. Enough. This doesn't leave this family. Do you understand? If this gets out, we all go down. But I leaned forward, my eyes meeting his. No. If this gets out, you go down. Not me. Not anymore. He froze. Because he knew I was right. The documents tied everything to their signatures, their accounts, their lies. I was simply the shadow they thought they could trample, the one who had been quietly gathering proof. My mother's voice broke as she whispered, "Please. Don't do this. We can fix it. We can make it right. Just don't ruin us." And in that moment, all three of them, my powerful father, my calculating mother, and my perfect sister, looked at me not with disdain, not with arrogance, but with fear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was the one holding all the strings. The wedding had already happened. My sister had walked down the aisle in a fairy tale dress, my parents beaming like they had achieved perfection. Everyone celebrated, everyone clapped, and I had smiled politely, keeping my calm exterior. But inside I knew the truth. That perfect wedding had been bought with what was rightfully mine. Every flower, every chandelier, every extravagant detail. They had taken my apartment, my money, my years of work, and turned it into a spectacle to parade their favorite child. And now, after the celebrations, the real game began. While the world thought the wedding had been the climax of the story, for me it was just the opening move. The pomp and glamour made my parents and sister careless. They assumed that their triumph over me was complete, that the fairy tale wedding had cemented their victory. But I had already sent the message. I had already seen the fear in their faces. And now, in the days following the wedding, as champagne hangovers faded and photo albums were made, I began my quiet campaign of control. Every time my sister bragged about the wedding, I reminded her subtly of what it had cost me without saying a word outright. Every time my parents counted their success, I made sure they knew in the subtlest ways that their empire rested on fragile, stolen foundations. And slowly, inch by inch, they began to obey my unspoken rules. Small tasks, small favors, small acknowledgments of my power, they were all pawns in my game. The wedding may have been a celebration for them, but for me, it had been the perfect stage for the beginning of the real story. In the weeks after the wedding, the house felt different. My parents and sister moved around carefully, almost on eggshells, their smiles forced and their words measured. Every glance I gave them felt like a reminder that I held the cards now. I never confronted them directly. I didn't need to. Instead, I let them wonder, what does she know? What will she do next? At breakfast, my sister reached for the orange juice and I casually mentioned, "Funny how some things can't be taken without leaving a trace." She froze, her hand hovering mid-air. My mother gave me a sharp look, but I smiled faintly and sipped my tea as if nothing had happened. Later, my father asked me to check something on his laptop. I did, but deliberately lingered, my eyes scanning files he assumed were private. His knuckles whitened around the edge of the table as he realized I wasn't just capable. I was watching, always. Even at my sister's post-wedding parties, I subtly reminded her of the truth. A quiet question about her new apartment, a casual reference to finances, a slow, deliberate nod when she mentioned her perfect life. She began second-guessing herself, wondering if everything she had celebrated was tainted. My parents tried to regain control, suggesting dinners, planning outings, trying to charm me back into complacency. I accepted invitations, smiled and said polite things, but every small interaction was a test. How far would they go to please me? How tense would they become with a simple word or glance? And the fear in their eyes grew, silently, invisibly. It was intoxicating. They couldn't touch me and they couldn't predict me. Every day I saw them unravel just a little more, realizing that their golden child and their power over me had been illusions all along. I didn't need to raise my voice, I didn't need to make threats. All I had to do was exist, calmly watching, waiting, and they would do exactly what I wanted, terrified of the unseen consequences of crossing me. The wedding may have been their moment in the sun, but in the quiet aftermath, I had become the shadow that ruled everything. By the third week after the wedding, the atmosphere in the house had completely shifted. My parents walked around as if the floor might swallow them, their eyes flicking to me constantly, waiting for some signal, any signal, of what I might do next. My sister barely slept. She called me late at night, voice trembling, asking questions she had never thought to ask before. What are you going to do with all the documents? Are you going to ruin us? I never gave a direct answer. Just a calm, measured pause. Silence is the most powerful tool I had. And every second of hesitation, every unspoken word, ate at her, made her question herself and her parents, made her feel the weight of the truth she'd been blind to. My father tried to reassert control, scheduling meetings, planning investments, hoping to distract me or charm me into compliance. But I played along, nodding politely, asking questions with just enough curiosity to keep them on edge. The more they tried to regain power, the more obvious it became, they weren't in control anymore. Even the smallest misstep made them sweat. I would casually mention something about accounts, or hint that I had looked at files they assumed I hadn't. My mother's hands would tremble, my father would flush with tension, and my sister would shrink in her chair, realizing that the perfect life they thought she had built was teetering on the edge of collapse. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't angry, at least not outwardly. I let them feel the consequences of their own choices. The betrayal, the arrogance, the belief that they could take from me and I wouldn't fight back. It all came back to them in quiet, relentless waves. And it worked. Dinner conversations became exercises in careful language. My parents answered my questions before I even finished asking them. My sister apologized for mistakes she hadn't even made. Every word, every glance, every gesture became a subtle surrender. They didn't realize it yet, but the wedding, the so-called triumph of their favorite child, was already meaningless. In the shadow of their stolen wealth and carefully hidden secrets, I had become the one holding the reins. And as I watched them, patient, silent, in control without lifting a finger, I knew. The world outside could see the wedding and think it perfect, but inside these walls, I was untouchable. Weeks turned into months, and the tension in the house became unbearable. My parents moved like shadows, careful, fearful, waiting for a signal from me that never came. My sister, once so confident, was unraveling. She began calling me constantly, her voice tight with anxiety. "Please. Tell me you're not going to expose everything," she whispered one night. I smiled faintly, almost kindly. "I'm not here to hurt you," I said softly. "But I am here to make sure you understand the consequences of your choices." She went silent, the words sinking in. And that silence, more than anything, broke her. She realized that the fairy tale her parents had promised was built on theft and deceit, and the reality was far darker than she had imagined. My parents tried everything. Sweet words, promises, gifts, anything to regain control, anything to buy my forgiveness. But nothing worked. Every attempt only reminded them of the power they had lost, of the daughter they had underestimated for years. Even the smallest gestures were calculated. I asked for a simple favor, checking on some old property records, and they jumped at the chance to please me, their fear thinly veiled behind forced smiles. They were living in constant anticipation of my next move, never realizing I was already 10 steps ahead. And slowly, inch by inch, their perfect family facade crumbled. My sister, once the golden child, now came to me for guidance, for reassurance, afraid to make even the smallest decision without my approval. My parents, their pride shattered, learned to measure every word, every glance, every breath around me. One evening, my father sat across from me at the dinner table, his hands clasped tightly. He looked at me, eyes filled with a mix of fear, regret, and a strange respect. We underestimated you," he admitted, voice low. I leaned back, calm, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Yes," I said quietly. "You did. And now, you know the truth." My mother's lips trembled. "You don't want revenge?" she asked, almost pleading. I shook my head. "Revenge is for the weak. I didn't need to take anything from you. You took from me already. I just let you live with the knowledge that I could." And in that moment the balance of power was clear. I didn't need to shout, I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to ruin them publicly or humiliate them. The fear in their eyes, the uncertainty in their every move was enough. The wedding had come and gone. The celebrations, the flowers, the dresses, the perfect photos. It meant nothing to me. Because while they had celebrated a victory, I had quietly claimed the ultimate prize: control. From that day on, the family that had once dismissed me, underestimated me, and stolen from me, lived in the shadow of my silence, my calm, my watchful presence. And I had never felt more powerful. Because in the end, I didn't just survive their betrayal. I outsmarted it. I outlasted it. And I became the one they could never undo. Revenge isn't always loud. True power often lies in subtlety. Making someone live with their guilt, fear, or uncertainty can be more effective than overt retaliation. Self-worth isn't given, it's claimed. You can't rely on others' validation. Building your own life and standing firm in your value is essential. Fairy tales can hide betrayal. What looks perfect on the outside may be built on lies and manipulation. Always question appearances. Control your narrative. When others try to diminish you, reclaim your story silently and strategically before they realize what's happening. Actions speak louder than words. Calm, deliberate actions often have a far stronger impact than shouting, arguing, or expressing emotion. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories.